The puppy's eyes found Alexander Rosas the instant he stepped through the glass doors of the Midland Hotel. Not a wandering glance, a calculated stare. The kind that cuts through the noise of Manchester's bustling streets and makes a billionaire stop mid-stride. Alexander had negotiated billion-pound deals across 3 continents. He'd stared down boardrooms full of hostile investors without flinching. But this puppy, no bigger than his hand, sitting perfectly still on the rain-soaked pavement of Peter Street, made him freeze. The little dog didn't move, maybe 10 weeks old, tan and white fur plastered to its body from the October drizzle, one ear folded back, the other pointing forward. It didn't bark or whimper or do any of the things desperate strays usually do. It just watched Alexander with an intensity that felt wrong, too deliberate, too human. Alexander's driver, Lionel Lawson, stood beside the black Bentley with the door already open. A conference call was scheduled in 12 minutes. The private jet was fueled and waiting at Manchester Airport. Alexander had exactly 48 hours before the Tokyo merger fell apart without his signature. He started walking toward the car. The puppy moved, not toward him, in front of him, blocking the narrow space between a newspaper stand and a flower cart. Its small body positioned with mathematical precision to cut off his path. Alexander stepped around it. The puppy was faster, repositioning itself directly in his way. They faced each other on the crowded pavement while business people flowed around them like water around stones. The puppy's tail remained still. Its posture wasn't playful or submissive. This was purpose. This was urgency wrapped in fur. "Sir, we really need to go," Lionel called from the car. "The M56 is already backing up." Alexander looked down at the puppy. The puppy looked back. Then it did something that made Alexander's chest tighten in a way no quarterly earnings report ever had. It turned around, took 3 deliberate steps toward the narrow alley beside the hotel, stopped, and looked back over its shoulder, waiting. "Before we go any further, make sure you're subscribed and that notification bell is on. What happens in the next 15 minutes will completely reshape how you understand loyalty, intelligence, and the choices that define who we really are when nobody's watching." Alexander checked his watch. 48 hours. Tokyo. 400 million pounds hanging in the balance. He looked at Lionel, who was staring at him with barely concealed confusion. Then Alexander looked back at the puppy, still waiting at the mouth of that alley, rain dripping from its small frame. "Give me 5 minutes," Alexander said, and walked toward the alley. The smell hit him before he'd taken 10 steps. Rotting food and standing water and something acrid that made his throat close. The alley was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people side by side, walls of dark brick rising 3 stories on either side. The puppy moved with absolute certainty now, navigating around overflowing bins and broken pallets, checking every few meters to confirm Alexander was following. 40 feet into the alley, the puppy stopped beside a collapsed pile of cardboard boxes leaning against the wall. That's when Alexander heard it. Beneath the distant traffic noise and the drumming rain, a sound so faint he almost missed it. A wet, labored breathing, like something drowning on dry land. The puppy barked once, not a plea, a command. Alexander knelt in the filthy alley water, his 3,000-pound suit soaking through at the knees, and began moving the cardboard. His hands were shaking. He didn't understand why yet. The first box revealed nothing. The second showed more darkness. The third box moved, and Alexander saw it. Another puppy, smaller than the first. White fur turned gray with grime and water, lying motionless on its side in a puddle, ribs expanding and contracting with terrible effort. Its eyes were closed. The back right leg was bent at an angle that made Alexander's stomach drop. The puppy wasn't making any sound except that awful liquid breathing. Each inhale sounded like it might be the last.
The first puppy walked over to its sibling and pressed its nose against the dying dog's head, a gentle nudge. The white puppy didn't respond, didn't even twitch. The tan and white puppy looked up at Alexander again, and the expression in those eyes erased every thought about Tokyo, about mergers, about anything that had seemed important 5 minutes ago. Alexander pulled out his phone with numb fingers. His screen was cracked. When had that happened? He searched for emergency vets in Manchester. The closest was veterinary specialists on Gadbrook Park in Northwich, 23 minutes away. He looked at the white puppy. Its breathing was getting shallower. 23 minutes might be 22 minutes too long. He shrugged off his suit jacket and wrapped it carefully around the dying puppy. The body felt cold even through the expensive fabric. Wrong. Too still. Alexander cradled the small weight against his chest and stood. The tan and white puppy immediately pressed against his leg, maintaining contact as they moved back toward the street. Lionel's expression went through several stages of shock when Alexander emerged from the alley holding a puppy wrapped in his jacket with another puppy trotting beside him. "Sir, I don't understand what's happening." "Northwich," Alexander said. "Veterinary specialists on Gadbrook Park, as fast as you can possibly drive." "But Tokyo, the merger, the—" "Drive, Lionel, now!"
They drove. Lionel navigated the Bentley through Manchester traffic with a skill that probably violated several laws. Alexander sat in the back seat, one puppy dying in his arms, the other sitting beside him on the leather seat, pressed against his leg. The tan and white puppy never took its eyes off its sibling, never whimpered or paced or showed any sign of panic. It just maintained that protective position, watching, waiting. Alexander felt the white puppy's heartbeat against his palm, faint, irregular. He found himself whispering things he hadn't said since his daughter died 6 years ago. "Hold on, stay with me, you're gonna be all right, just hold on." The merger was collapsing right now. He knew it. Without his signature, without his presence on that call, the Tokyo investors would walk. £400 million, 3 years of work. His board of directors would have him removed within a month. His reputation would never recover. He was watching his empire crumble in real time while holding a dying puppy in a soaking wet Savile Row suit. He didn't care. He couldn't explain it. He just didn't care. They reached the veterinary hospital in 18 minutes. Lionel pulled up to the emergency entrance, and Alexander was out of the car before it fully stopped. The tan and white puppy stayed with him, trotting beside his leg as he pushed through the glass doors. "Emergency," Alexander said to the receptionist. His voice came out rough. "This puppy is dying. Please." The woman's face changed instantly. She hit a button and spoke into her headset. "Dr. Fields, trauma intake, critical." Within seconds, a woman with red hair pulled back in a tight ponytail emerged from the back. She took one look at the white puppy in Alexander's arms, and her professional calm cracked for just a moment. "How long has it been down?" Dr. Jamie Fields asked, already moving toward the treatment area. "I don't know. I found it maybe 20 minutes ago. It's barely breathing. The leg is broken." "Come with me." Alexander followed her through double doors into a brightly lit room that smelled of disinfectant and fear. Dr. Fields took the white puppy and placed it on a steel table. 2 veterinary nurses materialized immediately, pulling equipment, preparing instruments. Alexander watched them work with practiced efficiency, cutting away his jacket, placing an oxygen mask over the puppy's small face, inserting an IV line into a leg that looked impossibly thin. "Severe hypothermia," Dr. Fields said, reading a thermometer. "Core temperature is 29 degrees. Normal is 38 to 39. This puppy has been in the cold and wet for at least 48 hours, probably longer. The leg fracture is bad but survivable. The hypothermia is going to kill it in the next 10 minutes if we can't get the temperature up." "Do whatever you need to do," Alexander said. "Money isn't a concern."
"It's not about money right now. It's about time." Dr. Fields looked at her team. "Warm IV fluids, heating pads, wrap the body. Let's move." They moved him out of the treatment room. Alexander found himself standing in the waiting area with the tan and white puppy sitting at his feet, both of them staring at the closed door. His phone was ringing. He pulled it out and saw 17 missed calls. Messages were flooding in. His executive assistant, his lawyers, the Tokyo team, the board chairman. He put the phone back in his pocket without answering any of them. The puppy at his feet looked up at him. Alexander sat down on the floor in his ruined trousers, and the puppy immediately climbed into his lap. It was trembling, not from cold, from exhaustion and fear, and the weight of having carried an impossible burden alone for too long. Alexander put his hand on its back. "You did everything right," he told the puppy. "You found help. You brought me to your brother. Whatever happens now, you did everything exactly right." They sat like that for 70 minutes. Lionel appeared at some point with coffee that Alexander didn't drink. His phone kept ringing. He kept ignoring it. The puppy in his lap eventually stopped trembling and fell into an exhausted sleep. But even unconscious, it kept one paw pressed against Alexander's chest, maintaining contact, making sure he was still there. When Dr. Fields finally emerged, her scrubs were stained, and her face showed the strain of fighting for a life that small. But she was smiling. "Your puppy is stable, critical but stable. Core temperature is back up to 35 degrees. The leg will need surgery. The hypothermia did damage we'll need to monitor. But the puppy is alive and fighting." Alexander's vision blurred. He blinked hard. "How much time did we have?" "Honestly, if you'd arrived 15 minutes later, we would have lost it. The hypothermia was shutting down vital organs. Another few minutes and the damage would have been irreversible." She crouched down and examined the puppy in Alexander's lap. "This one is in better shape, hungry and stressed, but physically healthy. These are siblings, probably 10 to 12 weeks old. Someone abandoned them together. This one stayed with its brother and then went looking for help when the situation became critical. It found me outside my hotel, led me directly to the other one." Dr. Fields nodded slowly. "Dogs at this age don't have the cognitive development for that kind of problem solving. They shouldn't be capable of that level of planning and execution. But clearly this puppy found a way. It understood its brother was dying. It understood it needed human intervention. It went out and selected a human it believed would help. That's remarkable. That's not normal." Alexander looked down at the sleeping puppy in his lap. "What happens now?" "The white puppy needs surgery on that leg. Between the surgery, hospitalization, and recovery care, we're looking at around £4,000. If that's not feasible, I can reach out to rescue organizations, but placement takes time and there's no guarantee of immediate help. The healthy puppy can be discharged today or stay here while we sort out arrangements."
£4,000? Alexander spent that much on wine at dinner last month. He'd spent 20 times that on his watch. The amount was so absurdly small compared to what he'd just lost in Tokyo that he almost laughed. "I'll cover everything, the surgery, the recovery, all of it, and I'm keeping both of them." Dr. Fields studied his face. "Are you certain? These puppies will need extensive care, the injured one especially, months of recovery, physical therapy, behavioral monitoring. This isn't a small commitment." "I've never been more certain of anything." The surgery took 5 hours. Alexander sat in that waiting room the entire time with the tan and white puppy asleep in his lap. His phone died around hour 3. He didn't ask to charge it. Lionel sat across from him, silent and confused, occasionally going out to move the car when parking enforcement came around. At some point, Alexander's executive assistant, Naomi Tang, tracked him down. She walked into the veterinary hospital in her usual sharp business attire, tablet in hand, looking completely out of place among the pet owners and animal posters. "Alexander," her voice was carefully controlled, "the Tokyo merger collapsed 2 hours ago. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Your phone has been off for 6 hours. I've had to tell 12 different people that I don't know where you are or what's happening. Please tell me this in explanation." Alexander looked up at her. "I'm at a veterinary hospital in Northwich. I found 2 abandoned puppies. One was dying. I brought them here."
Naomi stared at him. "You missed the most important business deal of your career for puppies. Yes. The board is going to remove you, you know that. Probably. Alexander, this doesn't make sense. You've spent 3 years building that Tokyo deal, £400 million, your entire legacy, and you threw it away for animals you found in an alley." The puppy in Alexander's lap stirred and looked up at him with those intelligent eyes. Alexander stroked its head gently. "My daughter died 6 years ago. Cancer. She was 12. I spent her last 6 months flying between London and New York, closing deals, building the company. I told myself I was securing her future, building something that would outlast me, something that mattered. Alexander, you don't have to. I missed her last 3 days because I was in Singapore. My ex-wife called and told me to come home. I said I would as soon as the contract was signed. The contract took 48 hours to finalize. My daughter died in hour 36. I made it home in time to watch them turn off the machines." Alexander's voice stayed steady, flat. "I built an empire, I secured a legacy, and I missed the only thing that actually mattered."
Naomi sat down slowly. "I didn't know. Nobody does. I don't talk about it. I work instead. I build instead. I pretend that if I make enough money and close enough deals, eventually it won't feel like I failed the only test that mattered." He looked at the puppy in his lap. This puppy walked up to a stranger and begged for help. It led me to its dying brother. It did everything a puppy that age shouldn't be capable of doing, because someone needed help, and it refused to walk away. It's 10 weeks old, and it's braver than I've been in 6 years. Naomi was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want me to tell the board?" "Tell them I'll be at the meeting tomorrow. Tell them I'll accept whatever consequences they decide. Tell them I'm done choosing deals over lives." Dr. Fields emerged before Naomi could respond. "Surgery went well. The leg is stabilized. No complications with anesthesia. Your puppy came through like a fighter." She smiled. "You can see it if you'd like." Alexander stood, carefully holding the tan puppy. He followed Dr. Fields back to the recovery area. The white puppy was lying in a small cage wrapped in blankets, one tiny leg in a cast that looked absurdly large. Its eyes were half open. When Alexander approached, the puppy's tail wagged weakly. The tan puppy in Alexander's arms made a sound, not quite a bark, something softer. Dr. Fields opened the cage, and Alexander carefully placed the healthy puppy inside with its sibling. They immediately pressed together, the tan puppy curling protectively around its brother. "They can both go home tomorrow," Dr. Fields said. "The injured one needs to stay overnight for monitoring. The healthy one can stay for comfort or go home with you tonight." "They stay together," Alexander said immediately. He came back the next morning with supplies. Dog beds, food, bowls, toys, everything the pet shop staff insisted he needed. The bill came to another £600. He barely glanced at the total. The puppies rode home together in a carrier, the healthy one pressed against its sibling's side. Alexander's London penthouse had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Thames and precisely 0 accommodations for dogs. He cleared space in his bedroom, set up the beds and supplies, created a safe area where the white puppy could recover without climbing stairs. The board meeting was exactly as brutal as expected. They removed him as CEO by a vote of 8-3, cited gross negligence of fiduciary duty and abandonment of corporate responsibility. Alexander sat through the entire proceeding without defending himself. When they asked if he had anything to say, he simply stated that he accepted their decision. His business empire collapsed over the next 3 months. Without the Tokyo merger, the company's stock price fell 37%. Major investors pulled out, partnerships dissolved.
The financial press, which had called him a visionary for a decade, now labeled him unstable, reckless, a cautionary tale about the dangers of emotional decision-making in business.
Alexander didn't fight any of it. He sold his remaining shares, paid his severance to employees who were losing jobs because of his choice, and walked away from the wreckage with a fraction of what he'd built. He focused on the puppies instead. The white one he named Keeper because its sibling had kept it alive against impossible odds. The tan and white one he named Scout because it had scouted out into a hostile world to find help. Keeper's recovery took 3 months. Scout never left its brother's side during any of it. Alexander discovered he was good at something other than mergers. He was patient, he was attentive, he learned how to read their signals, understand their needs, help Keeper through the pain of healing without the ability to explain what was happening. Scout assisted in ways that amazed Dr. Fields every time they came in for checkups. The healthy puppy seemed to know exactly how to support its brother, when to encourage movement, when to insist on rest. 6 months after that morning in Manchester, a woman from the Manchester Evening News tracked Alexander down. She wanted to do a story about his fall from grace, about the billionaire who'd thrown everything away. She expected bitterness, regret, a man destroyed by a single bad decision. Instead, she found Alexander in a small house in the Cotswolds with 2 dogs and an application pending to become a foster home for rescue animals. He told her the whole story. The puppy on the street, the dying brother in the alley, the choice between Tokyo and a life that needed saving. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Alexander looked at Scout and Keeper, healthy and whole, playing in the garden. "I regret every day I spent building an empire instead of building a life. I regret missing my daughter's last days because a contract seemed more important. I regret being the kind of person who had to be taught basic humanity by a puppy." He paused. "But choosing to help them? That's the first thing I've done in 6 years that I don't regret. The only thing." The article went viral, not because people were interested in a failed billionaire, but because the story touched something deeper. Within a week, Alexander received 300 emails, people sharing their own stories of the moment they'd chosen differently, the job they'd quit to care for a parent, the promotion they'd rejected to be present for their children, the success they'd walked away from because the cost was too high. A rescue organization in Birmingham reached out asking if he'd consider fostering medical cases, dogs recovering from surgery, from abuse, from situations where they needed intensive care before they could be adopted. Alexander said yes. Scout proved to be exceptional at helping scared dogs learn to trust. Keeper, despite his own trauma, showed patience with animals who were struggling.
Alexander fostered 11 dogs that first year. Each one found a home. Each one left his house healthier than they'd arrived. Dr. Fields started referring her difficult cases to him, the ones who needed more than medical intervention, the ones who needed someone to choose them over something easier. 2 years after Manchester, Alexander opened a sanctuary, not a business, a non-profit. He used the last of his money to buy land in Somerset, build proper facilities, hire staff who cared more about animals than profit. Scout's legacy, he called it, because Scout had taught him what legacy actually meant. Not the wealth you accumulate, not the deals you close, the lives you choose to save when saving them costs you everything. The sanctuary specialized in medical foster cases, dogs recovering from severe injury or illness, dogs who needed months of care, dogs nobody else would take because the expense was too high or the time commitment too demanding. Alexander took them all. Scout and Keeper lived at the sanctuary, permanent residents, helping every new arrival understand they were safe now.
On the 3-year anniversary of finding them, Alexander took both dogs back to Manchester, back to that alley beside the Midland Hotel. The city had cleaned up the area. The alley was brighter now, the bins properly maintained, but the spot where Keeper had almost died was still there. Scout walked directly to it, sniffed the ground, recognizing something human senses couldn't detect. Then both dogs looked up at Alexander with expressions that needed no translation. "We remember. We understand. We made it." "We did," Alexander said quietly. "All 3 of us. We made it." The sanctuary was thriving. 42 dogs had passed through in 2 years, 42 success stories, 42 lives that had been saved because Alexander had learned from a 10-week-old puppy that some things matter more than success, that being needed is privilege, not burden, that stopping to help when help is desperately needed is the only legacy worth leaving. His ex-wife visited the sanctuary 6 months after it opened. She walked through the facilities in silence, watching Alexander work with the dogs, seeing him patient and present in a way he'd never been during their marriage. Afterward, they sat in his small office, while Scout and Keeper dozed at his feet. "Our daughter would have loved this," she said. "She would have been so proud of you." Alexander felt his throat close. "I failed her." "You did. You failed both of us. You chose work over family for years." His ex-wife leaned forward. "But you're choosing differently now. That doesn't erase what happened. Nothing erases that. But it means you learned. You changed. That matters too." It did matter. It had to matter. Because Alexander couldn't undo the past, couldn't bring back his daughter or recover those lost days. But he could choose differently now. He could be present. He could show up. He could stop walking away from things that needed him just because helping was inconvenient or costly or required sacrificing something that seemed important.
Scout had taught him that. A puppy barely old enough to be away from its mother had shown a billionaire what courage actually looked like, what loyalty demanded, what it meant to refuse to abandon someone who needed you, even when doing the right thing cost everything. People asked Alexander sometimes if he missed his old life, the wealth, the power, the private jets and 5-star hotels, and his name in headlines. He always gave them the same answer. He didn't miss the life, he missed his daughter. And the life he'd built now, the one where he chose dogs over deals and presence over profit, was the closest thing to redemption he'd ever find. Because Scout had refused to walk away, had stood on that Manchester street in the rain and blocked the path of a stranger and insisted, with nothing but determination and desperate hope, that someone had to help, that someone had to choose the harder right over the easier wrong. Alexander had almost walked past, almost gotten in that car, almost chosen Tokyo and mergers and everything that seemed important. But he'd stopped, he'd followed, he'd chosen to be the kind of person who doesn't walk away when something small and terrified is begging for help. That choice cost him an empire, cost him his reputation and his wealth and everything he'd spent decades building. And it was the best decision he ever made, the only one that mattered, the only one that gave meaning to everything that came after. Scout saved Keeper, Alexander saved them both, and in saving them, in choosing them over everything else, he finally saved himself. That's what Scout's legacy means, not the sanctuary, not the dogs they've rescued, the lesson Scout taught on a rain-soaked street in Manchester. That being needed is a gift, that answering when someone asks for help is what makes us human, that stopping to save one small life might be the most important thing you ever do. Even if it costs you everything, especially if it costs you everything. Because what you lose was never as valuable as what you save, and the person you become by choosing to help is worth more than any empire you could build by walking away.